Welcome to the Republican Professor. This morning we have again Dr. Keith Buhler. Yes. Woohoo!
Yay!
Thanks for being here, Keith.
Thanks for having me on again. It's an honor, especially as I've been listening to the podcast recently. I feel like a midget among giants, Dr. Chalky and some of these other great guests.
Yeah. The ironic thing about what you just said is Dr. Chalky is actually kind of short, I think.
He is fairly short. That's one of his charms. I remember seeing him, walking to his logic class that he is famous for with his notes. Very short, but a giant in intellectual stature.
Yes, he is. He's like a hobbit, I guess. And I hope if he hears that he takes that as an immense compliment, because I mean it as a compliment. He is a giant. Keith, you're unique in the sense that you are a scholar practitioner. You have just done, I think, your 8th real estate deal or something. Is that right?
Yeah.
So does that mean you're not a real estate rookie
contract
anymore? You're still not a real estate rookie anymore. Is that right?
I suppose so. It's one of those things where people ask me questions that I actually know the answers to, if they're getting started or whatever. So I'm like, okay, maybe I can offer some helpful advice now.
Yeah. Well, what helpful advice have you given recently?
Well, I'm meeting with a guy next week and we're talking about retirement, right? So it's not just, hey, I want to get started in real estate. I want to make more money. That's a very vague goal. That's fine to start, but it's how much money by when, so I can help my retirement. And I just said, hey, this is basic financial advisor stuff. I'm not a financial advisor and I don't play one on TV. But if you can make, say $2,000 a month by building.
Sorry, how many dollars a month?
Say $2,000 a month.
Okay.
If say he has 10 years before he retires, if he can build up to $2,000 a month and you add that to Social Security and your 401k, then you maybe are going to be, your retirement's ready to go. So think 10 years, 10 properties at $200 a month on average. And that's fairly easy. That's very doable. So I was just kind of helping him to think about real estate as a piece of the pie.
Yeah, cool. How much cash do you have to tie up for that, though?
Well, that's the question. There's more aggressive and there's less aggressive strategies. Right. If you're just to go straight down the middle of the road, say you're trying to hit singles, you're not trying to hit home runs. You don't want to throw your back out, swing it at every fastball. You want to hit singles. I would say count on, something like 10% cash on cash return. So if you want to make $2,000 a month, you want to invest in terms of down payments, something like $200,000, which would buy you 20% of $1 million worth of real estate. So let's say you own $1 million worth of houses, but you only put 20% down on those houses, and you're making roughly $2,000 a month from that, and that will go up as rents rise and as your mortgage balance goes down. You can refinance it to lower your mortgage payment to increase your cash flow. So yeah, 200,000 over the course of the next 10 years. That's 20,000 a year, and this is somebody who is getting closer to retirement, so he has money in savings that he could now start to take out of savings and put into a house, and he could get there 200,000 in 10 years, without sweating.
Wow. What about interest rates going up? How's that going to affect things? Inflation is
inflation's terrible. Inflation tends to correlate with the value of real estate. And so once you own it's hard to get into the property, but once you own the property, inflation going up is actually going to maybe increase the value of property, and your net worth's going to keep up with inflation, which is kind of nice. That's one of the big benefits of real estate, as opposed to say the stocks where, the stock market got cut in half or whatever recently. And, there's
or as opposed to just buying cash.
Just going to the ATM and buying cash. So what you want to do with interest rates going up is you want to look at your spreadsheet and don't get emotional about it. I've had people, who said, I would buy a house if it was 3%, but I won't buy it 4%. Well, what does that 3 to 4% mean for your monthly payment? What does it mean for your affordability? What is it? And what does it mean if it goes up to 5 or 6% and you didn't buy it 4? Right. So you can't just say, oh, I decided I'm not going to buy it 4%. Like, you can't just say that. You have to look at the spreadsheet and say, it's going to increase my monthly payment by $200. But at the same time, if it continues to go up, which it always could, then I'm saving $200 a month if it went up to 5%. So it's really about, is it the right time for you to buy, and can you afford it? When I'm looking at investment properties, I'm doing the underwriting, which is when you run the numbers to see if it's a good deal. I'm doing the underwriting at 6 or 7% to make sure that by the time the deal closes, if rates have gone up, that much, I'm still willing to do the deal.
That's
and then
smart.
anything below that is gravy. You're okay.
Wow. Okay, so you have 8 properties. Is that right? Or you're under contract for the 8th one?
Yeah. So
Okay.
8 properties and 22 units. In other
22
words,
units. Okay.
yeah, we call it 22 doors. There's actual renters, 22 different renters contributing their rents to our properties and creating income.
Mm-hmm.
So that's up from 2 units, 2 doors 2 years ago.
2 units, two doors 2 years ago. That's quite a gain. And this whole
Yeah,
time
so
you've
20
been,
doors in the last 2 years.
and this whole 2 years you've been working full time, or probably more than full time, as a headmaster for K
Yeah.
through 12.
Yeah,
So in Southern California, not
that's right.
not in Topeka, Kansas or something like that. You're in SoCal, where, a hot dog costs like $800,000, right? At the ball game.
Right.
So Keith, there's so many ways we could go here. This is so fascinating to me because you have a PhD, you're involved in K through 12 with these little kids, and you're doing real estate deals, and you seem so confident. That's what I noticed. How are you really confident, or is that just a facade that you put on?
Confident about real estate, or
Yeah.
confident in general?
Yeah.
Yeah,
When you
it's
run the
going well.
numbers, you're like, okay, this has to work.
Oh, it's ridiculously easy. I mean, you and I, Lucas, have worked very hard for academic credentials, right? And doing a PhD is hard. It takes time,
Yes.
and it takes a complexity of thinking that a lot of people don't have any patience for, right?
Right.
Real estate is not like that. it takes time, but it's such big building blocks. It's like if you're used to building circuitry and someone says, can you build this out of mega blocks for my 2-year-old? And you're like, ta-da. I put 2 and 2 together. I mean, my joke is is it a good deal or not? You pull up your spreadsheet and there's just 2 columns and it says, did you make more than you put in? It was a good deal then. So who's that comedian that's like, how many units of girth is a UPS package?
But it's gotta project out into the future for you to feel confident about it, right? So you have
That's right.
22 doors. That means you have to have people in there,
Yeah.
and they're not only in there, they're not squatters. They're not in there but not paying.
Right.
So do you have to consider the jurisdiction? Because
Yeah.
typically in certain jurisdictions, I mean, President Biden, I forget which political party he is. He put a moratorium on evictions. He thought he could do that
Yeah.
for the public health panic. I hate to call it a pandemic. I want to call it a public health panic because I want to,
Yeah.
not saying that there's not a real public health issues that we deal with on a daily and weekly and monthly and yearly and decadely basis. I mean, it's always been here. Disease has always been here. The question is, how do you respond to it? And the sledgehammer approach, which was to respond callously toward people's life savings that they've put into small business, callously, discriminating toward large employers like Walmart against small employers, like your local neighborhood restaurant that doesn't have a lot of outdoor space but they have a lot of indoor space, but not a lot of outdoor space because that's owned by the city. Stuff like that. I mean, you have these concerns, right? So some jurisdictions, they might say, oh, no, you can't evict somebody. They don't pay rent. And so does that factor in? Do you think about that when you look for a place?
100%. Yeah. If I can back up, I want to say, because the full-time work comment, like the way I'm doing real estate is as a total side gig. And, there's 100 ways to do it. And a lot of people, do it full time. And of course, they're going to make a lot more money a lot faster. I'm doing a very, very tortoise level method here. 1 deal a year, 2 deals a year. And when you do a deal, I mean, it doesn't take that much time. Once the system is kind of set up, I'm working on the weekends, maybe once a week, making a phone call, and then it kind of goes into passive mode. I maybe have to go to UPS to sign papers to close a deal, and I send them out because I'm doing all my stuff out of state. I'm not driving to the property. I'm looking at pictures online. And so this is very, very passive part-time type of a thing. And so that's the first thing. Is it's been like almost like a relief from work. It's like a avocation, right? I'm sick of looking at, budgets and enrollment numbers and meeting with people. I'm going to go play with numbers and, dream about what I could do in the future with a little bit of side income. Because
that's awesome.
I've been in education. That's the second thing I want to say. I've been in education for 15 years. I've been a teacher or a poor grad student. And I've always been content being poor. I don't like having a lot of money. I don't like having a lot of responsibility. At least that was how I was as a young 20s. But I thought, I want to make enough. I want to make the minimum amount of money and spend the minimum amount of time working, right? That's how some of my younger friends now also think. And that's how I thought. When I had my first kid, I got married and I had my first kid, I totally changed my tune, because it's like, money isn't just for me. Money's for my wife to be able to, I don't know, buy that kitchen utensil that she wants without me having to like check the budget, or you're gonna have to save up for 2 months for that, honey. And money is for my kids to get them experiences, to take them to places. In graduate school, we had a summer vacation budget of $200. That included the gas and the hotel. So we basically had like a $50 left over for experiences. So we would drive to a national park, get a hotel for 2 nights, $60 a night, $70 a night. And then we would have a few dollars to buy food and experiences. And that's the stuff that my kids like really remember and really love. And so, I read this article that said, spend money on experiences, not gifts. Basically, that's the bottom line. And I'm a big believer in that. So these things kind of put pressure on me to think about, okay, if you're going to stay in education, which I love, and I never want to, until they drag me out of the classroom in a coffin or a wheelbarrow, I never want to leave teaching and administrating, but I do need to make my own side money if I'm going to have any of these experiences. And so that's really the motivation.
To me, you're like a private school headmaster dream, because there's a huge budget crunch on private schools. As you know, there's a structural problem, first of all, because everybody's paying taxes for government schools. The government schools will take your make regardless.
Right.
And then, so folks that really care about the education of their children enough to make sacrifices to send them to a private school have to also come up with the other extra cash for that. And guess who feels the pinch? Well, it's the teachers and the administrators of the private schools that are making just a fraction of what public people, their public counterparts, make, with none of the structural protections that the public people get, and none of the big, huge pensions and the Cadillac health benefits and stuff like that. So for you to be enjoying the pursuing financial independence, and doing your real estate rookie stuff, that's quite they really lucked out to get you your school.
And that was kind of my pitch too to my board, was like, hey, I want to keep doing this on the side, and it's going to keep me from begging for raises, and it's going to keep me from, and in some possible future, I could be donating to my own school. I donate a little bit back, in terms of buying things and not getting reimbursed, or donating a little bit when I can. But like I closed the deal and gave a little bit from the proceeds of that deal last month, because it was like my first big, you could say, profitable deal, as opposed to you spend money to make money.
Right.
But I'm thinking in the long-term future, I'm thinking about, we have an endowment, we have a very baby mini quasi endowment. How do I generate money for that endowment? Well, maybe maybe the school can buy passive income producing real estate and keep it in the endowment. So it's all tax-free, growing on its own. And the proceeds are going into our scholarship fund, as opposed to people's cash dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually been a very interesting synergy. You wouldn't think, on paper, go hire a headmaster who's also investing in real estate, but it's worked really well, because everything I've learned about real estate, I would say, not everything, let's say 90% of everything I've learned about real estate, I've learned the last 2 years. I figure it took me 5 years to get a Ph.D. in philosophy. It's going to take me 5 years to get my Ph.D. in real estate. And that will be the proof of concept. Will be, I don't have to write a book, but I have to show my portfolio. It's like art school, right? My portfolio of property.
Yeah.
But what I've learned in the last couple of years is that investors are donors. These are wealthy people who donate. What's part of their overall mission in life, to support organizations and people. And donors are investors. I mean, there are no rich people who don't think about investment as a category, right? If you're rich, you think about, what do I do with all this money, or what do I do with these assets? And there's tax incentives and so on, but you just think, who can I help with this money?
Right.
So one thing that's converged is talking to donors and learning that they invest, talking to investors and learning that they donate, and trying to think, how can I use this to benefit my school in the long term? How can we build a financially stable private Christian academy that's going to have a lifespan of 20 years, let's say, before I retire, and then 100 years after that, or indefinite. So that's been a cool overlap.
That's awesome. So you're an activist. That's what I hear, and I mean that in like genuine, the best possible way of that. I mean, you're not just, like over there, definitely on one extreme, Scrooge, counting your gold coins. On the other hand, you're not just like kind of like one of these kids that inherited everything and just riding around in your Ferrari. You are coming at this from somebody who was poor, and you're 100% committed to the mission of education, and you're an activist.
Yeah.
So, and
I think
you're also a theologian. So how does theology come into play here?
Well, right. Yeah. I mean, theology comes into play in that our Lord says it's hard to be rich and saved, right? So I'm trying to acquire more wealth, and that comes with that other spiritual danger. You have to be poor in spirit, no matter how successful that your investments may or may not be. You have to, one thing my mentor taught me is you have to basically wake up every day and say, if I lost it all, I'd be fine. I could live in a 1-bedroom apartment with my 2 kids and my wife, like I did. in 2017, I could live on the street. I mean, camping's pretty fun. I could go to campsites and live in a
Wow.
tent. And so you kind of have to have the attitude of, as long as this is fun and it's working and you're enjoying the journey, I'm going to keep going. But if it ever becomes weird and yucky and I'm thinking about, money all the time and boring people with conversations about investing, then it's time to slow down or stop. And the thing with real estate is you can, if I stopped trying to get new properties, right now I have 3 partnerships. So my partners are making the majority of the money, and I'm making a small percentage because I invested their money and I set up the deal for them. But their income would continue to go up over time, and my income would go up over time because of rent increases, because of the houses appreciating, because of paying down the mortgages. So you really, at any point you stop, you're going to continue to grow your income.
Right.
And so that's like a cool feature of this passive investment kind of strategy.
Now, I don't know how comfortable you feel sharing any of this, but my question, when you said you had 22 doors, was how many of those doors have to be filled for you guys to break even? Because you're not the only one. You're not the only one that's on the hook for this, right?
Correct.
You're not the only owner.
Yeah.
Is that how you guys talk? Is that how you rich people talk? Owner? Is that a word you use?
I'm not rich yet. Yes.
I'm just kidding. I was doing an impression of a Democrat for a second.
Yeah, I did get some flack from my Democratic Facebook friend for owning property. She's like, "You're causing rents to go up and stuff like." I'm like, I have nothing to do with this. I own a property that someone wants to rent.
Yeah.
But anyhow,
basic economics.
Yeah. So
there's a lot of rich Democrats, though. That's the funny thing about it. Especially in California,
oh my gosh.
The whole state the state is dominated by them.
They're rich on taxpayer salaries, taxpayer funded salaries, rather than like working hard and figuring stuff out.
Probably majority of them, fit in that category. Yeah.
I mean, there's some talented Democratic, actors and so on, and God bless them, but
tech people.
Yeah. So the short answer is yes, you always are calculating the numbers such that the mortgage, which is your main kind of financial obligation, the mortgage has to be covered by the rents, plus what I call set asides, or you could call reserves. So the mortgage plus the set asides. Set asides would be vacancies, repairs, and capital expenditures. Capital expenditure is your roof. The roof's going to need to be repaired in 10 years or 20 years. So it's not like a repair, like a pipe broke, but you really don't like to think about that because it's 10 years from now. That's a long time. Yes. So capital expenditures is a separate line item in my underwriting that says mortgage is an expense, and then set aside for repairs, for vacancies, capital expenditures. And so that what total.
What do the percentages look like for that?
So you can, it's an artistic thing. You can kind of set it how you want, depending on your risk, depending on how much money you have in savings. I do 4 to 5% for repairs, 4 to 5% for capital expenditures. So just to give you some numbers, let's say you bought a $100,000 house that you're renting for $1,000 a month. Okay. And the mortgage is $600. Okay. You wouldn't say, wow, look at $600 mortgage, $1,000 of income. I'm making $400 a month, because that doesn't have any set asides. You would say, I'm going to put aside 5%, which is, like of 5% of 1,000, which would be $50. I'm going to put aside $50 a month for repairs, which is a little low. I'm going to put aside $50 a month for the capital expenditures. And I'm also going to put aside, I would put aside like 1 month per year of vacancies. Let's say you're renting it for 1,000. You would want to have $1,000 in a little vacancy reserve fund, because someone's out for a month, you lose that income, but you pay for it yourself from your own savings, and your cash flow stays steady. That's kind of the idea, is you're keeping your cash flow even. Now, if you have $100,000 sitting in the bank somewhere and you have a month of vacancy, you don't care, you don't need to keep that reserve fund, but it's just an artistic thing.
Yeah.
So
what, okay, you got 4 to 5% a month you're setting aside for repairs, 44 to 5, not 45.
correct.
Otherwise we'd be at 90% right now. 4
Yeah.
to 5% for capital expenditures. And then you gave a different formula for the vacancies, but what does that work out for percentage per month?
It depends on the
10?
rent for that.
10%?
Yeah, it depends. Well, so you want to have $1,000 total. Like after you get 1,000, say even $500. $500 means you can pay for, actually 500 for my current property manager, $500 would pay for a vacancy for oh no, I'm getting confused. $500 to $1,000, let's say $1,000. Once you get to $1,000 in your vacancy, let's say someone stays for 2 years and there's no vacancy, or let's say that they move out and a week later it's filled again. You didn't use that vacancy reserve, so you don't need to like keep on funding it. So $1,000 would be like 1 month's worth of vacancy. Once it's funded, you kind of ignore it, as opposed to the repairs where you want to keep funding it even if you don't spend it, because repairs are coming sometime.
What are the leases all for the same term of years or months? Are they month to month? Are they 6 months, 1 year? What's the breakdown for those 22 doors?
Typically, and I have to say that it's 12 doors right now, but we have a 10 unit under contract that we just got under contract on Sunday.
Okay.
So I'll talk about the 12 doors. They're all year leases. And then at the end of the year, we'll usually ask the tenant, do you want to sign up for another year? And there's like a small incentive to do that. Or do you want
basket? What do you do for the incentive?
Yeah.
Is it a Sig Sauer, a new Sig Sauer?
I've been experimenting with little gifts or just like a monetary
guinea
incentive.
pig.
Yeah. A white elephant that they cannot feed but cannot let die.
Do you allow pets?
In most of them, yeah.
Okay. Are you now? What's the turnaround time if somebody leaves? How do you get the place ready again? I mean, I know that you can't really say until you see the place, but is that a concern of yours that you have to? Do you have to replace the carpet, or do you just get the carpet cleaned? How does that work? How much money does that cost?
It's so easy, it's ridiculous. I understand the question, and people get very anxious about well, how would that work? But once you do it once and you realize that there's very little trouble to it, it becomes silly. So
I mean, in the normal case where they're not stealing your copper and stuff, pummeling down the walls.
Which hasn't
Sorry,
happened
we're
yet,
in California. We have to think about this stuff. You don't have any rentals in California, right?
So I do not. I cannot afford California, and the numbers don't make sense. So this is back to your question of vacancy. One of the things I've learned in the last 2 years from podcasts, talking to investors, and reading books, and from my own experience, is you pick a market first. You don't necessarily want to buy a house that's close to you and try to make it work. I just helped a friend run the numbers on buying a house that's close to her, and she was going to invest a whole lot of money on a California home, and she was going to make a 1% return.
Oh, ow.
Okay.
Ow.
And I said, my minimum in Kentucky is like a 12%, and I'm shooting for higher than that. I can't say how much higher because people think it's a scam, but I did get more than 12% on my last deal. Okay. In terms of cash on cash return. So
praise God.
What you do is you shop for a market. What is a good market? A good market is people are moving into the city, which is going to mean that the places for rent have people to rent them. It means that there's jobs and a diversity of jobs in the city or the metropolitan area, which means that the people who live there are gainfully employed and can pay their rent. And you want to look at, basically desirability. Is this a place you've heard of? Now, Florida, Texas, Tennessee, and actually Riverside, California, are in the top 10 most migrated to markets in the country right now. And so you just look at that and you say, okay, I'm going to start in Florida, Texas, Tennessee, and Riverside.
Tell me again what the other one was besides Riverside.
Florida, Texas, and Tennessee, they happen to be red states.
I'm sure that's an accident.
They happen to have like, one of them has like Ron DeSantis, you know, as opposed to Gavin Newsom. It's probably a coincidence, like you're saying.
That kind of stuff doesn't matter.
But these are states where, and then these are states that are landlord friendly. We call it landlord friendly, meaning that if someone's not paying their rent, it's not an excruciatingly long and difficult legal battle to get them to leave. I have had to evict one person before, and it was a very, I think I've asked people to leave, so they weren't evicted. I just said, hey, we're gonna dissolve your lease, and you know, would you like to go, because we're not having a good experience.
What was the issue? They weren't paying rent, or
they were paying late every single month for like a year.
How late?
Like half a month late.
That's late.
So they'd pay on the 15th and they'd catch up, and then the first would come again and they couldn't, you know, the cash flow was behind.
Okay.
And so I said, and they were great people, and I just said, look, can you guys catch up, you know, over the summer and before we renew the lease? Otherwise we'll go month to month and we'll part ways, you know. And so they were a little upset, and that was fine. It was a little upsetting, but like that's the way it goes. So there was one guy that did not want to leave, and so we had to go to court in Kentucky, and the judge gave him 2 weeks to catch up on his rents, basically. So like the judge was
did you have to fly to Kentucky to go to that hearing, or did you hire somebody?
Yeah, so my property manager, I have 3 property managers now, in different central Kentucky, northern and southern Kentucky, or southeast. And they do everything. This is part of their services that they provide. So they sent me a legal bill for like literally $75 that they had to go to court and talk to the judge, and gave the guy some time. He didn't pay his rent and he left. And so we had to eat that money, whatever. But we got it filled with a new person who's very happy. And so it really wasn't a big deal. And that's partly because Kentucky is landlord friendly.
Gotcha.
And so
they're a bunch of racists. They're a bunch of hick racists in Kentucky. And we're extremely enlightened here in California. That's right. With all our homeless laying around in the streets and the gutters, and with their syringes, the syringes sticking out of their arms. Yeah, it's flourishing. Yeah, flourishing area.
But the question about vacancy, I've never had, and this is like, it could change tomorrow, right? But I've never had a vacancy longer than 2 weeks, unless I was choosing to like, oh, let's renovate a little bit harder, let's change the flooring. And so basically the places that I own are desirable enough that when it pops up on the market, I mean, I was getting 10, 20 applications a day.
Wow.
So if you go to Florida, for example, I can't afford Florida either, but if you go to Florida, the last I heard, there are 0 houses available for sale. Every house is, so the only new houses that are being, if someone puts something on the market, it's going to go quick. The only houses that are being created are new construction. So you're literally waiting in line with a million other people to get a house built so you can move into it. And there's just nothing to buy. There's no vacant houses that are not already filled. So that's a good sign that, you should invest there. The average home value is maybe $250 or something like that for outside the big cities, but of course it's higher in the big cities. So if you invest there, if you can afford it, you pretty much know for the next 10 years, you're not going to struggle with vacancy. So that's one of the things you control for by shopping in the right market. And same thing with squatters. I mean, if I had someone squatting, which, thankfully hasn't happened, then we would kindly put a notice on their door and say you have to pay. And then
let's go back to theology really quick. You said that God, our Lord said it's hard to be saved and rich.
Yeah.
How can you kick somebody out, Keith? You're a Christian. Don't you follow the Lord? So the Lord said he has nowhere to lay his head. Where's your compassion? Where's your Christian?
Makes you more Christ-like.
So yeah, I mean, tell me
so,
I think how you process that.
It's just like any other business. If you own a restaurant and people come in and eat and don't pay, you can kindly put up a boundary that says you can't come in here and eat anymore because the last 10 times you didn't pay your bill. If you choose to feed somebody out of charity, that's your choice. But if they choose not to pay, that's called stealing. And so I think that having boundaries and enforcing them in the business world is ethical. You don't want to evict people for no reason. You don't want to evict people because of your own convenience, right? The lease is a mutually binding contract. You have a place to stay for a year. I have more or less guaranteed income for a year. That's the trade. We're both getting the best end of this deal. If I don't give you a safe and clean place to stay, then the government of Kentucky is going to come tell me to take care of that. I had cockroaches, and this lady, she got really upset, and she got the government to come and investigate and see if there was a real significant problem. And they said, just call the exterminator and have him take care of the cockroaches. It's not a big thing. Like, you can't sue this guy. So we took care of that, and that's it. So I mean, if I said I'm not going to take care of the cockroaches, or if it's truly an infestation, as opposed to they're just coming out of the sewer like they do sometimes during the year, then she can take legal remedy. So it's a mutually beneficial, business relationship to rent to somebody, and you can't fail on your side of the bargain either.
Are you saying that God cares about landlords?
God cares even about landlords. His love extends that far.
This is the title of the episode. God cares about landlords too. I think it's an interesting thing for people to think about, like that whole boundary thing. Of course, we're getting into a little bit of psychology there, but there's a lot of abuse out there under the guise of spirituality. That's
right.
You don't have any rights. You give up your rights when you're a Christian. Well, I guess it would be even if you're not a Christian, you somehow don't have property rights. What do you think is the foundation for your view of property rights? Because that's really what you're talking about, right?
That's right. I mean, I think of I think this is a quote from Alistair McIntyre, but if it's not him, I don't know who it is. But that even materialists and naturalists, their last metaphysical belief is in property rights. When I say this is mine, I bought these a couple days ago from the gas station. When I say it's theirs until I give them that $6, and then I give them the $6 and I say it's mine, nothing has changed in the material world.
Right.
But we think that
well,
matters,
location was changed.
Sure. So if I bought it and left it there and I said, hang on to them for me, then I'd be a glasses landlord.
Yeah.
But like, that seems to be odd in a naturalist framework. But I think that most real things are abstract and invisible, right? God, angels, the forms and souls, and the past, and maybe even the future in some sense, are all not materially present.
Right.
And so property is one of those things that you can own. First, your body, and you can own things around your body. And that when you have a mortgage deed that says this transfers from this person to that person, the deed isn't the ownership, but it is an effective sign of ownership. And the ownership has changed somehow. It's sort of like when you say, I do, you weren't married and then you become married. And being married is a metaphysical reality that just happens, some point by the time the service is over. In the Orthodox Church, we don't say I do. And so you're sort
what
of
do you
like,
say?
You don't
say,
you don't
yeah.
Really, you betcha.
9.
Well, in Kentucky, you say, yep. No, you basically, they ask you, have you come of a free and unconstrained will? And you say, I have. And then they start the service, and by the end of the service, you're married. It's the priest does it all,
Gotcha.
So anyhow, it's one of those transfers, like becoming an adopted child of somebody. It's one of the, or becoming married, or disinheriting somebody, or adding someone to your inheritance. It's one of those transfers that is real and it has a legal reflection, but it's hard to limit it to just the legal. I don't think property is just a legal right. I think property rights would exist on a desert island. Let's say you say this is my beach because I've fished here for longer than you, and I say, okay, well, this is my beach then, and I can't go on your beach if you don't want me to. I don't know.
So ownership is it's not purely reduced to enforcement of claim. In other words, it's possible. See, this is why I think being a Christian helps us understand our own legal system.
That's right.
And I think that non-Christians have a harder time. I think, except for Jewish. I would say, let me put it this way: the Judeo-Christian tradition has an easier time understanding our entire legal system. And that's why I'm a little bit frustrated sometimes when I kind of scroll through my feed and I look at Christian podcasts, and there's an obsessive amount on abortion as the only legal thing they ever focus on. But that and like religious liberty. But it's like there's so much more actually going on that really should be the focus just as much, I think, of it just turns out in our with the kind of judges that we love, the ones that are pro-life typically get the whole thing. They get a lot more than just the life thing because they're related.
Yeah.
But that I love that the way you said that, because I mean, kind of, and it is tricky to kind of dial down and get at what exactly is law. But in some sense, we have a view of God that is like a supreme lawyer in a way. And
interesting.
When we say God is judge, like in our system, the judges are lawyers. I mean, you don't have judges that are not lawyers.
They're like super lawyers. They're lawyers who
that's what a judge is. I mean, judge knows the law. The judge has to know the law. And the idea of law, and so we think of God in those terms, and there's a lot there that I think is behind this stuff. I don't know what if you wanted to say something about that. I'm thinking of the Marxist systems, for example, where there's just a view that whatever the state says goes. That's what the law is. The law is what the state can enforce.
Right.
So there's a lot of corruption.
There's either no underlying reality that the law could be inaccurately, reflecting, or
there's no truth to the matter beyond enforcement. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And
that's why there's so much corruption.
There is no like natural law, or they say the civil law is the natural law. And that, like Thomas Hobbes says that, whenever even the meaning of words, of disputed words, whatever the king says that the word means, that's what it actually means, and actually has to be in scare quotes because they don't actually have a concept of actual. We are the ones who have the concept of actual.
Spoken like a true Platonist. God bless you. Or actually an Aristotelian.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think God as judge is a really interesting metaphor, and obviously, biblical metaphor, and so something more than just a metaphor. But it has to be balanced against God as father, God as creator, God as lover, right, husband. And so when you put all those together, you get the sense that, oh, maybe it's not that God is a lawyer, but lawyers are in some sense reflecting a heavenly reality, the way that fathers are, right? Paul says fathers get their name from the Father in heaven. And so maybe like judges get their name from the judge in heaven. So he's the real thing, and they're this sort of like partial reflection. I'll never say anything nice about lawyers ever again. I'm sorry that came out, but no. Well, my dad used to make lawyer jokes, so I feel like
see Mary Ann Glendon's book, Nation Under Lawyers. That book, just read it. A Nation Under Lawyers by Mary Ann Glendon.
Okay.
And that's all I'll say about that.
Well, And I'll say something else about law that I learned about the Romans, right? That the 12 tables, which is this like kind of like the 10 commandments of the Roman law. Although it's 12 tables, not 12 laws. It's a whole bunch of laws. The first table and the first law is if someone summons you to court, you have to go. And I think that's a very interesting kind of like almost first principle to say, if we're going to be a system of where the courts enforce justice, you can't opt out of going to court, because then the whole system falls apart. You're a complete sort of anarchist. You're not submitting to the court. Now, people break the law. There's criminals all the time, but we make the criminal go to court. We take them in handcuffs at gunpoint to the court if need be, so they can go through the system that they don't believe in or that they want to violate, the law anyway. So I just think that even the Romans had this strong understanding that law abidingness, including respecting people's property, was a kind of a non-negotiable, and if you don't submit to the punishment for breaking the law, you get to go to the special prison where we still try to treat you like a human being, but you've opted out of our whole system.
Yeah, you experience a measure of civil death.
That's right. Like, we don't know what to do with you. We said stop, you said no. We said we're going to punish you, you said no to that.
Right.
Where do we put you? We're going to put you in prison. Okay, but I don't want to play ball. I don't want to go out on bail. I don't want to get on parole. I don't want to have good behavior. Like, you're not one of us. The only place for you is way outside.
Right.
So
yeah,
so
that's
anyhow,
good. I would give a plug for Richard Epstein's book, Takings. That's a key book, and he's not Christian. I think he's Jewish, but Richard A. Epstein, Takings. It's on private property, and he goes back to the Roman law. He always goes back to the Roman law. We had his co-host on the podcast. He runs probably the biggest law podcast in the country, called Law Talk with John Yoo. We had John Yoo on.
Cool.
And I'm going to try to get Epstein on, although he's old and I'm not sure if he even checks his email. We'll see. But I would like to have him come on and talk about property rights, because that's a key thing. A lot of people, the issue of takings has been so messed up by the courts. It's in the Constitution. The government can't take your property without just compensation. What constitutes a taking, and how much scrutiny do you exact on any kind of taking done by the government? It's a fascinating area of law, and I think it's a key issue. Like, I think actually, if a judge has that issue right, I would trust him on probably everything else, including the Second Amendment. Yeah,
no kidding.
Because a lot of the Second Amendment stuff is really takings issues. It's the government not really respecting your property. Like, take for example the 10-round magazine or the 11-round magazine ban or whatever. It's a standard capacity magazine. It numbers in the hundreds of thousands, millions. The state of California arbitrarily says you have to block that magazine at 10 rounds, and either you do it or the manufacturer does it, right? Well, ordinarily you'd think if you can fit 10 rounds in a magazine for lawful purposes, the 11th round shouldn't make you a criminal just because it's number 11. It doesn't make any sense. It's arbitrary and capricious. Arbitrary and capriciousness is the lowest standard of review for striking down any government action under the Administrative Procedure Act. Any kind of rulemaking that's arbitrary and capricious has to be struck down.
Right.
Well, it doesn't. I mean, but the deference given to stuff like that is so great that it just amounts to a taking.
Yeah.
And it's certainly there's no just compensation.
You rightfully acquired this magazine.
Sure.
And then they're saying you can't own it, or we're taking it back, or we're criminalizing it.
Right. And it's just the reasoning given doesn't make any sense. It's like, it would be like if you had, take for example, an analogy with cars. You have, most cars have more than 10 gallons of gas that you can fit in the gas tank.
Mm-hmm.
Ordinarily, when you're going to the gas to buy gas for lawful purposes, I mean, you're not buying it to commit arson, for example. You're not buying it to burn down Stanislaus National Forest, right? You're buying gas to get to work. It's lawful purpose, right? It's an ordinary usage of that gasoline. Well, you ordinarily, you just buy as much as you can fit in the gas tank.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be like if somebody just didn't like cars and they didn't like gas, and they said, well, we've done some studies and it's possible that some rational person out there somewhere thinks that 10.1 gallons and above should be criminal because it's possible it's not safe for something.
Right.
Well,
I mean,
okay, so then you now I have to arbitrarily block my gas tank, which requires expenditure, some kind of expert, and then it inconveniences me. It takes my time. It inconveniences the manufacturer now, that they have to stop those now and start, and it doesn't make any sense, because if I have a right to 10 gallons of gas, I should have a right to 11 gallons of gas. It's the
well, and that's
it's
the
about
problem
what
with
you
it.
can fit in the magazine. If I can fit 11 rounds, which Glock magazines, you can fit 11 rounds in there. It's a spatial issue. It's not a, anyway. So,
Well, so I mean, the problem there is that it's not actually arbitrary. It's that they're trying to get it down to zero, right? They're like 10 is one step closer to zero, and they're trying to use the law to incrementally outlaw guns.
Yeah, but who bears the burden of proof in showing that?
Yeah.
Because they will deny
right.
that. They will deny that till the day, they'll say, oh, that's not what we're doing. That's not what we're doing.
But it's the only possible explanation. Yeah.
It is the only, but that requires an attention span for you to see that. Yeah. So, but my point is that takings is really the issue, and so many things. And my guess is that someone like that would have the right view of abortion, because it's about limited rights. I'm sorry, limited rights for the government, right? The limited powers for the government. Now, when you were leveling up on your real estate abilities here, did you make any mistakes that you want to share, or is there anything that you can help us with, like expect if we want to get involved, and what would you suggest people do to get involved?
Yeah. So the first thing that I've heard a lot of people say, and I will just echo it, is that you want to educate yourself first. There are quote unquote classes and courses you can take. Of course, they're usually offered by an individual or maybe a business. It's not actual like university or school classes. But when we say educate yourself first, we mean like pick up Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad and read it and think about it. And then you go to his website and look at his top 10 recommended books, and go to a guy I really like is Marco Santarelli. He's got a podcast and a book, I think a couple of books. Marco Santarelli, Passive Real Estate Investing Podcast. And you can start just with the latest episode of that. Let's see, Complete Guide to Investing. He's got a little book that's called, I can't remember the name of it, but it's something like, how to get started with passive real estate investing. You listen to some of these guys and gals, and their information starts to converge. They start to refer to each other, and that's when you start to realize, okay, I'm getting some mastery here. But it's sort of the kind of thing where if you start anywhere, you can get to where you need to go. So don't try to pick the perfect first book. I really enjoyed the classic, The Richest Man in Babylon, that was recommended on some podcast, and I picked it up. I found that it was written, before the 1900s. I think it was like maybe a turn of the century book. So it's a very old book that just is a paradigm shifter for somebody who was raised not really understanding money. So you want to like start educating yourself as widely as possible, not just for real estate, but understanding the basic principles of money and financing and saving and investing. And then when you get into the real estate space in particular, there's, again, sort of universal principles that you can find in just about any of these books. And once you feel like you kind of have those, then you can start to think about, okay, applying them in a particular market. What market, how much money do I have, and what market do I want to look in to make my first purchase, my first investment? Having a mentor is great. It's going to reduce your anxiety. But just having a plan and a system that you have used or that you've built from reading these books and listening to these podcasts and talking to investors, that's going to help you decide, you know, whether you're kind of on the right track or not. So I will say that we bought the house that we lived in when we were in Kentucky in graduate school in 2012. We bought the house we lived in, but it was a duplex. So we rented out one side, and that was like the beginning of our investment journey. And that was just because a friend told me it's a great way to do things. You rent out the other side of the duplex and it reduces your total, you know, mortgage bill essentially. So between that and 2020, so 8 years, we didn't do anything. But in 2020, I bought my first house. It was a duplex in Lexington, Kentucky. And that it was like the first house I'd never lived in. If you know what I'm saying, it's like the first investment property. And it was very scary. So I didn't make a mistake there, but I just want to like note that anxiety is part of the process. There's nobody telling you, there's no teacher telling you you're doing the assignment right. There's nobody looking over your shoulder going, you calculated those numbers wrong. So there is a bit of risk, and it's like fortune favors the bold. If you've done your research and you've educated yourself and you've done your homework and maybe showed it to a mentor, then you can have a little bit more confidence. Okay, I'm making a wise investment here.
How do people get a mentor, and what obligations do you owe a mentor? Like, you know, it can't just be receiving, right? What do you provide the mentor? What do they get out of it?
So for a lot of these real estate guys that are fairly young and fairly successful, there's so much information on the internet that a lot of people have started becoming investors like me, you know, virtually with nothing. I have no background in real estate, no successful businesses under my belt that I'm using to launch this new venture. It's really just pinching pennies from my teacher salary and my wife's salary. But you can get all the information if you're self-motivated and if you're a self-learner. So a lot of these guys have become successful and they get bored. They're tired of making money, and so they start classes. And the classes might cost money, but they really are fundamentally a public service. You know, like they're not making as much money teaching the class as they could buying their next property, but they're sick of making money. So there's guys out there and gals who will teach you their system. You can buy their book, you can go to their seminar. I went to a free seminar about how to finance deals from a guy who has a mortgage company. And he's like, yeah, someday in the future, I'd like you to use a mortgage with me. But for the purposes of this seminar, all this information is free. And it's all because I'm sick of making money. I'm so flipping rich at this point that I don't need to grift. I don't need to like sell myself anymore, you know?
But they're getting something else out of it.
There's a lot of people out there.
They're getting something out of it, right? What are they getting out of it? What's the mentor? What's the psychological reason for the mentor to show up?
Okay, that's the question. So yeah, so I was gonna say some people charge, and obviously they're making a little bit of money. But some people, I think it's more blessed to give than receive. I think some people realize that they would just enjoy their life more if they were helping other people to achieve their goals than just focusing on achieving your own goals, you know? So there really are some selfless and we call them unmercenary in the Orthodox Church, right? Unmercenary. There's some unmercenary people out there who want to help you. I'm doing one deal with a partner right now where I negotiated myself down like multiple times. Like I want to receive less out of this deal because I want to see you get your first deal. And I want to see you, and this guy's a businessman. So as soon as he gets the process, he's going to be able to do his next deal on his own, and he's not going to need me. What I get out of that is I get the pride of knowing I helped him launch his career. And that gets me, it's like teaching, that gets me high. I know that I helped you to become smarter, wiser, better, more virtuous.
So you have to like the person. The mentor has to like you.
That would be ideal.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
And then the other thing is, so you want to understand the general principles. You want to understand, hopefully maybe have somebody to help you. I've had 2 or 3 investors that I can call, including podcast guests, by the way. Someone will be on a podcast and they say, here's how to contact me. I send them an email and they emailed me back and we talked. And these are some like big name investors who totally gave me their time for free.
Wow.
So, that's why I want to put my email at the end of your podcast and say, like, if you want to reach out, I will try to respond, even if it's, hey, I don't have much time, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
But
yeah.
The point being that once you know your goals, so my goals were very clear from the beginning, is I want more spendable income on a month-to-month basis because I don't make enough money for my now growing 4 kids, right? I have 4 kids.
Wow.
I want more spendable income month to month. That means a very specific type of property where you're getting in for as low of a price as you can and as high of a rent as you can. There's specific markets where that's the case. That you don't have to do it that way. You could go for example, in Florida, you're going to get a very high appreciation because the demand for new housing and demand for used housing is so high. Whatever you buy it for today, it'll probably be worth more in a year. Now that's not cash in hand, but your total net worth or your total like retirement, when I sell everything at retirement, that total amount's going to be bigger. So there's different, once you know your goals and you know kind of what's possible, assume anything's possible. Assume you could be making an extra $1,000 a month within like 6 months. Is that what you want? Or do you want to have some kind of, in 30 years or 20 years, I'm going to have this much net worth? Or, assume everything's possible, pick what you want to do, and then try to make that happen. And just little steps at a time.
How do you choose a property manager? It seems like kind of a big risk because they're taking care of everything for you, right? And what if you get the wrong one? Don't you worry about that?
Yeah. So property manager is the most important thing. It's market first, property manager second. So if it's a good market, then you have to get a good property manager. If you're in a bad market, your good property manager still might, not be able to fill those vacancies because there's no one to rent. Good market, good property manager, and then you have everything else like a good property and a good tenant. It's kind of like
who's interviewing the tenants? Who's getting an eyeball on these people? Is it the property manager or is it you?
That's all the property manager. Yeah. So I do very little other than try to get a new house and put the money into it. And the property manager takes over. They get the keys. They put it on the market. They take photos. They put it on 12 different websites, rents.com, apartments.com, Zillow. They screen the applicants, and I can tell them, hey, I want you to screen for higher credit score. I want you to screen for higher income. I can manage the manager a little bit, but typically if they're professionals and you trust them, why would you interfere? Okay. And then you say, what's the market rent? They say, well, we have 10 houses on this street and they're all $650 a month. So we're going to start at $650 a month. And you can say, oh, I want to have a cheap discount housing to keep the vacancy low. Let's do $625. Or I want to maximize my returns. Let's do $675 and see if anybody bites. So you can kind of work with them, but again, they'll give you advice on what's the rent. They'll fill it. They'll send you the lease. I have an online portal where I can see the leases. And then you give them a bank account and they keep track. They do the accounting. They keep track of expenses, repairs. And then they send you the rents every month. If something's late, maybe they enforce a little late fee of $25 or, but I can email them and say, hey, why are they late? This is the second time, and they say, oh, they're having trouble with making their payments. They said they're going to catch up. So they're taking care of everything. I don't have to interfere if I don't want to, for the most part. And then
you don't have to use, you've never had to use violence or anything?
I never have. I did have this. This is an interesting story. I did go visit all of my properties last year, and I had a tenant sexually assault me.
Oh, wow.
While I was visiting.
Seriously?
Yeah,
wow.
I probably foolish to interfere, but I was in her house trying to like fix things. I could have hired somebody to do this, but I wanted to go see inside all the properties. I had 4 at that time, and everybody was very nice and friendly and so on. But she was, a divorcee and a single woman who I think had mental health issues. And so me being friendly appeared to her as flirting, and she came on to me. And my wife was like, "See, I told you not to go visit the properties. Leave it up to the manager." But it was a sort of a new experience for me. I've never been touched in an unwanted way before by like anybody, male or female. So you do have to have, it goes back to boundaries. If you're going to visit somebody in their house, you kind of have to know in advance. Keep it professional. Maybe don't be too friendly. I'm blaming the victim now. See, I was too friendly. It's my fault. No, but I was trying to say that the property manager is so important. It's kind of like if you take a class, universally, maybe this has been your experience. Someone says, "I hate geometry." You say, "Did you have a good teacher?" And they go, "No, the teacher was terrible." Well, you don't know if you like geometry or not. You just don't like that person, right? And if someone says, "I love history," did you have a good history teacher? Yeah, they were great. Okay, so you don't know if you like history yet. You just like that teacher,
Interesting.
And it's the same thing with property management. My sister lost some money in the 2008 crash on her investments. And she said, "Oh, it's terrible. Be careful. Oh my gosh, when you're starting to get into real estate, people project their anxiety onto you." And guess what? She had a terrible property manager. They were not tracking the things. They were losing money. They were in violation of little codes enforcement. People had left notes. You have to fix this, and they didn't do it. And so, of course, she gets an email from the state of Arizona, like, "You're in violation of this law." Well, that should be the property manager's job. You need to know that they're doing a good job, but they need to do the good job.
Gotcha. Okay.
So anyhow, so the way to shop for a property manager, there's lots of podcasts on this too, but like,
yes, I'm sure.
You ask them questions just like you would interview any other professional. Like if you're getting a lawyer, how long have you been in business? How many units do you manage, right? My guy, Tyler is his name. He said, "I manage 2,000 units." And I said, "You can't be all bad." Right?
I don't know. At some point, maybe there's a diminishing return on his effectiveness. Don't you worry about that?
Yeah, of course. But what that means when you have that many units, that means he has 3 construction crews who work only for him. These are not people you have to book their time, competing with the next door neighbor. These are guys who are going from unit to unit to unit. So if I need a fence removed, was the last thing we did. Like they showed up within 2 or 3 weeks, took the fence out, and it's very minimal cost because they're getting paid basically salary. So I'm not paying like retail handyman wages for these things.
Right. Gotcha.
So anyhow, you just get to know the property manager, do a gut check. Do I like this person? Do I think they can do a good job? And maybe interview 2 or 3 before you decide, or better yet, get one on recommendation. But then once you have a property manager that you trust and you're ready to go with, then you start talking to them about the properties. "Hey, what do you think of this property? 123 Main Street." They say, "Oh, that's a good part of town," or "That's a bad part of town. We have houses for high rents. We have houses that are vacant there." And you start to kind of collaborate.
Before you pull the trigger on a property, do you physically see it?
So as of right now, I am no longer visiting. I haven't seen, except for the first, well, I should say, except for the first one that I lived in. Yes, all the ones I bought sight unseen.
Okay.
Which sounds scary.
Wait, hold on a second. You said all of them you have bought sight unseen.
That is, I've not been inside. Yes. And it sounds scarier than it is.
Okay.
I've seen pictures. In some cases, the property manager.
I mean, hopefully, wait, hold on. Let's get this on the record. He has looked at pictures. Okay, people. So you're not just like going, "Yeah, that sounds like a good address. I like that number." And 6 is my lucky number. I like that. I like Elm Street. That sounds nice. I like that. It sounds beautiful.
And after we bought it, we found out it was a hole in the ground. But no, pictures. And in some cases, the property manager or the real estate agent will do a walkthrough on Zoom. In some cases, there's a professional inspection where they're sending you dozens of photos and a complete list. So there's ways of reducing that scary feeling of I'm buying something I've never actually been inside.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's possible to be inside the property and miss a bunch of stuff too if you don't know what you're looking for. So it's not necessarily that that's a good use of your time.
That is a very rational statement, and people don't realize that. If I was to buy a car, I I would want to test drive it, right?
Sure.
But I can't diagnose a car's engine problems. I just don't know that much about cars.
Yeah.
So if I was to buy a car that someone else was going to drive, like I'm buying a taxi that someone else is going to use for their day job, it really doesn't help me to test drive it. I don't know what to look for.
Right.
So
you mentioned a book earlier, Robert, it was a Japanese last name.
Kiyosaki.
You said it was Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Why did you reference that book? What did you get out of that book? What's the
in real estate investing,
reason I should read that?
In real estate investing, they call it the Purple Bible, because for everybody, it was their like red pill wake up moment.
Okay.
It's a fun book. I think I read it when I was younger. It's a fun book to read because Robert Kiyosaki is very pugnacious and combative. But if you're ready to sort of like have a paradigm shift about finances, money, taxes, wealth, it's a very powerful, it's a very useful book. What he argues, the premise of the book is that he was raised by his dad, his birth dad, who was a government employee, salaried, educated, had retirement accounts, and was poor his whole life, and basically had nothing to pass on to his kids and so on. He had his friend Michael's dad was self-employed, private sector, uneducated, entrepreneurial, and rich his whole life. And he would ask the same question to both and get this sort of like, right answer, wrong answer. And so it's a very powerful sort of stark contrast of most of us were taught about money from people who don't have any money. Most of us were taught by our poor parents or poor teachers or whatever, poor mentors, how to use money, how to invest, how to save, how to make money. And so what's going to be this result? We're going to be poor too, as the cause, creates the effect. Yeah. And so he's giving you the tools, and it's a difficult book in the sense that you have to really be willing to unlearn things, but he's giving you the tools and the concepts to understand how money really works. You don't have to use them. You don't have to become rich, but maybe you'll understand why you're rich or why you're poor if you understand these concepts. So it's a powerful book, and because he talks about real estate as one of the main ways of getting more money out than you put in, it's become the kind of the big red Bible or the big purple Bible for a lot of investors. So a lot of people will recommend that start there and then read my book. And let's see, he talks about taxes. He talks about business, starting a business. One of his big concepts is the idea of an asset. Okay, when we use the word asset,
there's no cussing on this show. Oh, I'm sorry, asset. Okay, sorry. I thought you said
assets.
Something else.
No, big assets. I like big assets, and I cannot lie. But he says an asset, we typically think of an asset as something that has value or worth. And he says, no, an asset is something that makes you money every month. So your primary residence, which you're spending maybe in California a $3,000 or $4,000 mortgage on, your primary residence is not an asset. It has value, but it doesn't make you put money in your pocket every month. It takes money out of your pocket every month. Yeah. So that's a very contentious thing to say, and whatever, he's trying to make a point. But when you take his definition of asset, just try it on, and you look at your personal finances, my wife and I did this. We had a big long list of things we own that have value. And we had one thing besides my job. We had one thing that makes us money every month, and it was our investment property. So in other words, after 8 or 10 years of marriage, we had a single asset. Everything else we'd spent money on had lost value or just stayed the same. And I'm going, wait, so if I want to get ahead and not like, if I want to be able to buy a new minivan in 5 years when my kids are, you know, a little older, and if I want to be able to pay for my kids' college, or if I want to be able to retire, I have to get more assets. That was the paradigm shifter. Not make more money. What do us poor people do? We think, I don't have enough money. I need to work harder, get a job, and make more money. And it turns out that will never work. You are always going to be poor, no matter how much money you make. There's tons of poor lawyers, doctors, and surgeons, and poor professional basketball players.
How are you defining poor?
They spend everything they make, and they have no assets. And if they stopped working, they have zero money left. So, you know, if you stop working, if you have even one asset, back in 2020, my little duplex was making $500 a month on top of mortgage and all the set-asides. So if I stopped working.
So that was on top of the set-asides, the 4 to 5 for the repairs, the capital expenditures, your
taxes, insurance.
The 1 month you're setting aside for vacancies, you're saying your in pocket was $500 a month.
$500 a month.
That's pretty good.
It was great, and that's after, you know, 8 years of rents naturally rising. Right, I'm actually below market value on all my properties, below market rent, so people are not paying as much as they would for the next door neighbor's house.
So they have an incentive to stay put and not constantly be looking for another place. That's
part of it. Yep. And also just, I have been neglectful in raising the rents and paying attention to market rates. But you know, so the rents naturally rise. It's a market thing. It's not a personal decision. And so the amount of profit you were making day one, which was maybe $250, has naturally gone up $30 or $40 per month per year as the new lease, you know, maybe they're paying $650, now they're paying $680. And that $30 is pure profit because all my expenses have stayed the same, right? So after 8 years, it was about $500 a month for this one property. And if I stopped working and I was disabled, living on the street, going into the mission field, I would still have that $500 a month income. That's an asset.
Okay. So you want to get more of those, and the way you get more of those is by rinse and repeat. Find a system and keep going. That's right.
That's right. And I've pivoted my system because my system required me to, you know, essentially to save up $20,000 or $25,000 of my own money to buy another house next year. And that's a lot of money to save. And so my wife's work is sort of inconsistent. And so we've pivoted now to these partnerships where I've done, you know, 3 deals on my own, and I have a market, a property manager, you know, an understanding of the financing and all these things that I can bring to the partnership. All you need to bring is capital. You've got your $20,000, $25,000 or more. And we're going to go try to find a property and we split the profits. So I've done that now 3 or 4 times and could potentially, without having to invest my own money, could potentially meet my financial goals in the next, 4 years.
Wow. 4 years.
Yeah. So the goal is by 2026, I made a 5-year plan last year, by 2026 to reach a certain level of passive income where the assets are paying, even if the assets are growing in value, whatever, that's very abstract. They're paying cash money every month.
Kiyosaki asset definition.
Kiyosaki assets. If those assets, which I own personally or co-own with partners, are producing my target passive income goal, then I will kind of totally pivot my strategy. Say, look, my income now is met. I set a benchmark based on my salary from a couple years ago. So if I can make this much through real estate, then now I either double my income because I'm still working my salary, or I can change the way that I work. I can work different hours. I can donate. I can start another organization. So that's kind of the goal is, in the next 4 years to grow the portfolio to that level.
Wow. That's awesome. So all of this was accomplished without any threats of violence or resorting to just basically mafia tactics, hiring hitmen, hiring thugs or goons to threaten people. That's pretty much the only method I know about. So this is get rich dad, poor dad.
Get rich dad, poor dad. It's very enlightening.
Hey,
What's
speaking of
amazing is that,
oh, sorry.
well,
I was going to
it's
ask
just,
you about your own dad because that's on
Mhm.
my list.
Oh yeah, we have to talk about that. Well, I was just going to say that what's
Speaking
amazing
of
is that
dads,
people who want to sell these investment properties that are making money, you think, why would they want to sell? Well, they're like retiring and they're ready to cash out, or they've got a better opportunity in Florida and they want to get their Kentucky properties out of the way. So everybody's happy. The seller's happy. Me as the buyer is happy because I'm getting an investment property. The renter's happy because this place is coming on the market and it's been renovated and it's been made nice and it's all new and it's all ready to go. And so everybody's happy. The employers that employ these people, now that person has a nice place to live, and so they're going to be a better employee. So that it's just, you're part of this system, and of course you get some financial benefit for it. But it is kind of a beautiful thing.
so the endorphins are there, the serotonin. I'm taking it back down to the material world.
Oh yeah, some oxytocin.
It's really just about the chemicals in your brain, basically.
That's right.
So everybody's
right.
got good chemicals, and that sounds really cool and idyllic. How do you find your business partners?
Mostly just talking to friends, like my
Craigslist?
brother. My friends. I mean, I've been so jazzed about this. I mean, I've been poor for so long
Yeah,
that if I'm able to give myself a raise, I get really jazzed about it. And I'm
yeah,
telling my brother-in-law, and he's like,
right.
I'm investing in this, that, and the other thing. Maybe we should do a deal together. I say, okay, I don't know what I'm doing, but if you're willing to take the risk with me,
Hmm.
let's do it. And of course, I've since then learned more as to make it less risky. But one was a college buddy, one is a church buddy, and then this next one will be with my brother-in-law. And
And
things could go
these have
wrong.
all worked out. I have to ask you, and I'm a little bit worried about asking because I mean, are you really going to tell the truth? Because these are people you know, but we're trying to get a sense for whether you're honest or truthful about this. These have all worked out, these partnerships.
So far, I mean, they're young, right? So they're
Yeah.
um, a year old.
Lots can
One
go
is
wrong.
3 months old, and one is like under contract right now.
Cool.
So far so
Lots
good.
can go right though. So
Lots can go wrong. You want to have an exit plan. You want to have we have a legally binding operating agreement that talks about how we split the profits. And if you disagree, you want to be the first one to concede, right, out of love. But you don't want to be like a jerk. But we also have an exit strategy. It's like, hey, if we need to sell this property and we calculate the profits, we split the profits, we can dissolve the partnership. That's it. And so you want to work with people that you could conceivably get along with. You want to establish. So I establish I'm the decision maker when it comes to, like, I'm the only cook in the kitchen. I'm the decision maker when it comes to the property and what we do with it. You're the decision maker with regards to, do we keep it or do we sell it? If you're happy keeping it and going, it's your money that's invested. But if you want to sell it, you want to cash out, kill the golden goose, stop receiving those eggs, then I'm not going to fight you on that, right? I might think it's more profitable to keep it going, but you have most of your money invested. So that's what we agreed in advance.
how did you get the language, the specific language for the operating agreement? Did you use a boilerplate or did you actually
Yeah.
hire an attorney for that?
So I had a couple attorneys look it over, but it's pretty boilerplate. It's very simple. It's, this is our split, and then the rest is boilerplate. So as I
But
get
the
more,
language I have a little bit of experience with operating agreements, but the language of who is making the decision on the operation, how do you, what language is that? Where do you get that from? Are you called the president of this partnership, or are you just
so
the manager? What's the
managing
language?
partner, yeah. So
Okay.
limited partner or the capital partner, and then the managing partner. We do have to agree. We have to unanimously agree if we decide to take out a loan or something like that as an LLC. But mostly it's the who's making the decision. That's verbal. That's a verbal agreement. Like, hey, I'm gonna be the decision maker on everything except for do we keep or sell. And if they say, cool, if they say, I want to be more involved or I want to learn the process, then we negotiate that. Or I want to buy you out someday. We don't have anything in there that says one person can buy the other person's shares, but that is just always a possibility. If I say, hey, I love this house, I want to buy you out, you'll get the money today, but you don't get the passive income indefinitely. Or if they want to buy me out, I understand the process well enough now. I'd like to buy out your portions and take over this property for myself. That's always a possibility.
You can add that to the operating agreement later.
You can add it later, or you can just do it because I think that's governed by corporate law. Like you don't have to have specific.
Which state
language.
is the operating agreement in?
So Delaware.
Okay. Glad I asked.
Because somebody on a podcast told me to open corporations in Delaware. There's like better friendly corporate law in Delaware.
Yeah. Delaware has that reputation of being the best, which is really strange because it's run by Democrats.
Yeah.
That's really odd. I mean, actually Joe Biden is from Delaware. So,
well,
but yeah, they're very friendly to corporations. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you got it. You got it's an LLC?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's incorporated in Delaware. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense. My favorite beer brand is in Delaware. Dogfish Head beer is in Delaware.
Oh, Dogfish Head's great.
So now they have to pay me 10% on all profits because I said that one sentence in this podcast. Tell us about your dad. Do you have a minute or two to talk about your dad? Because he came up last time and someone said, no, talk about his dad.
Yeah.
Your dad was on the radio. What was his name?
Rich Buhler. He was a radio talk show host, pastor, pilot, best-selling author, consultant, really a journalist. He was a news editor, was his, I think, first career out of college was in news. So very, very interesting guy. And he'd be the first to tell you, he passed away in 2012. But he'd be the first to tell you he did not have a master plan for his life. He kind of took one step, one foot in front of the other, and God led him into all these different opportunities. Very multi-talented, very personable. To meet him was to love him, get a big hug and have a big laugh, and just you're part of his fan base. I mean, it's just that simple. Very humble.
How many fans did he have, you think?
Well, so I would say at the height, so he was syndicated, nationally syndicated, and he was on the the radio every day for 10 or 15 years. Christian radio, so I would put it in the hundreds of thousands at least, that knew him, listened to him, maybe had bought one of his books, maybe had heard him speak at their local church.
What was his daily radio program called?
He had two. The big one was called Talk from the Heart, and then he had one called Table Talk. And if you go to richbuhler.com, we have been sort of collating his books and some of his audio seminars. We just republished one of his books called Pain and Pretending, which is a beautiful book about how survivors of abuse, childhood abuse or neglect, have to pretend, they have to put on a second self to function in this world, to hide their pain, and that this causes obviously relational difficulties as adults. And so he's helping them to understand how to get the part of you that's hurt to come out and to be the public self and to integrate those. And it's a beautiful book. I read it, for my own edification, as well as out of just wanting to see what my dad was all about. But he's got 3 books that you can get the links to. The used copies are not readily available. You can go on eBay and it says like $100, and you probably shouldn't pay that for one of these books, but there's just not many. So the Pain and Pretending, you can get the 30th anniversary edition for a regular book price, like $12, $13, whatever it is. So he wrote books. He had a lot of people that were helped in that way, and he he was a pastor for a number of years before he got back into radio. So he had a very pastoral heart, and he brought that to his radio show. So he was one of the first, we think of like Dr. Laura or
Gotcha.
some of these, phone counseling kind of things on the radio. He was one of the first to do that in the early 90s, late 80s, I think. And people would open up in public about their sexual abuse, let's say, or about their childhood physical abuse. And anonymously, he would give them counseling, and everyone listening was like, that's me too.
Gotcha.
So he had this big impact on people.
What was his academic background like for that?
He got his BA in psychology, I think, or journalism from Biola. So he was a Biola guy. And that's where he met my mom. And they married as like sophomores in college.
Wow.
Maybe they're a little older, but they met that young. And so he never got he failed out of seminary because he couldn't do Greek. And back then Greek was like necessary. So he did end up getting 2 honorary doctorates. And so he would sometimes jokingly call himself Dr. Rich, but he was very clear that honorary doctorate is a little different from an earned doctorate. And this is a little bit of a story that's self-aggrandizing, so forgive me, but he once told my uncle, because I struggled in high school and I left early to go work for a year before I went to college. And my uncle asked my dad, what's up with Keith, leaving high school? And my dad told him, Keith will be the first one in the family to earn a Ph.D.
Wow. He said that?
So he said that about me, and I didn't know that until years after his death. My uncle told me that story. But he knew the value of education. It was a voracious reader and all this, but his doctorate was earned, or was honorary.
Gotcha.
So he eventually became the pastor of a Foursquare church that didn't require that kind of seminary, education.
Right. Okay. Were you guys close? Were you close?
We were. He died of cancer, and the cancer sort of like, forced us all to deal with our issues. If we're going to talk this out, we better do it quick. So I wouldn't say we were close growing up because of, emotional family difficulties. My parents' marriage did eventually end when I was 18. And so that was, I don't think I was healthy enough to really like understand who my father was and to kind of appreciate him for his strengths and weaknesses until I was an adult. And he was very humble. I could lay into him. I could complain about his parenting and just call him every name in the book, and he would listen and say, thank you for sharing with me. And so a lot of parents, have a hard time with that, hearing how their adult children giving their performance review.
Yeah.
So
there's a biblical command to honor your father and your mother. And how do you understand that command in terms of public comments about your parents? I know it's a delicate issue, but I think there are different understandings of how to approach that. Like some people might think you can honor your parents, even if you might have some critical remarks.
For sure.
But and other people, they might feel like they're obligated to lionize and idealize their parents in public, even if that's not really how they feel.
Yeah, I mean, that was even an issue at his funeral. We all got to speak, and I was like, do I say like our connection wasn't perfect, because it seems like it could be disrespecting the dead right there, or it could be bringing things a little bit out of the ether into the real world, which is he had a better connection with his friends in many cases than some of his kids. Now, some of my siblings never had this issue that I had with him. They were able to figure him out and figure themselves out. So I'm not even putting the blame on him as much as saying our connection we couldn't figure it out until I was much older. I'm very sad now that he's gone, because I do appreciate him more, and I want him to know my kids, and I want to share with him about life and things like this. So I definitely miss him now, but there was some frustration with wanting him to be a certain way that he wasn't, right, growing up. And you just sort of have to let that go. You have to let your parents be who they are, ask for what you want. And if they can't do it, you got to go find it elsewhere. They can't be everything.
Do you feel comfortable just giving us a little bit on just an example of what that might have been for you guys, you and him? Just for us to hold on to a little bit.
Right. So I think a very simple example is I like to, like, some of my best friends and my wife and anyone in my sort of inner circle, we like to take long turns of talking. Like the interview format is typically question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. But the sitting on the back porch, overlooking the lake on vacation, possibly a beverage in hand, that kind of conversation is question and then 30-40 minutes of answer. And that's how I prefer to communicate. I want to hear you talk for 45 minutes about what's going on with you. And your wife's Facebook post today was very suggestive and interesting of life changes. And I was like, I just want to hear you go, right? If we were having coffee or a beer. And I want to.
You drink beer?
I drink LaCroix, but it's not alcoholic. Yeah.
Okay. No, I was just kidding.
Yeah.
And do you smoke cigars?
I do smoke cigars on occasion. I try to not be. Let's
have a cigar at some point.
I'm in. So anyhow, all that to say.
So your dad would talk a lot, and that was good?
He would talk a lot. He would talk a lot. I liked hearing him talk, but I didn't get a chance to talk.
Oh, okay.
And if I would talk, it would maybe be like a couple of minutes, and I really wanted 30 minutes, right? So it sounds pretty petty now, but it
doesn't sound petty at all.
Okay.
In fact, I want to reassure you that does not sound petty at all. And I think the thing I noticed about the two shows that you mentioned, the word talk is in both of the names, and that that's a really wonderful connection with your dynamic growing up, and I can understand why that would be very frustrating. I relate to that a lot. Yeah.
In fact, one of my counselors said, I'm a professional listener and your dad's a professional talker. Like that may not be something you're going to get from him, right? That this is not his. He's invested a lot of time and energy into being a good talker, and he is darn good at it. And so, and again, my siblings would say he was a great listener. You had to understand him. You had to, you had to push through maybe some interruptions, and then he would listen. So they figured out the code. I just was really sensitive, and so I've tried to be that for my kids. Like listen for a long time and see what comes out.
Wow. Well, a lot of times, I've noticed that the issue of what is a good listener is not very well understood in our culture, I don't think. And it's getting worse with social media because people seem to be getting shorter and shorter attention spans. You go from people would ride for hours to go see Abraham Lincoln debate Douglas for hours. They would stand in the rain with no microphones. And somebody would take notes. The only reason we know what they said is because people took notes. They took detailed notes, and they were published in newspapers. And there were no recording devices, right? You had to. The reason we know exactly what they said is because it was written down, and people were listening very carefully. And then the time that they would have to go back home, they would be thinking about it, right? And what are they looking at? They're looking at the birds. They're looking at that rock over there. They're maybe saying hi to somebody once in a while, but they had time to think and really listen. Their listening muscles were there. And our listening muscles are so emaciated that we don't even know we have them. Like,
Hmm.
it's almost like someone who had no biceps and then they see somebody with biceps and they're like, oh my gosh. And it's like, well, you have that too, but you just don't develop it. And it's a very interesting thing, that people tell me about the podcast is they're impressed with how well I listen. I listen very carefully and I ask
Hmm.
very good questions. And sometimes
Hmm.
I take a little bit of a risk and I ask questions that the guest may not be interested in answering. Um, but the reason I do that is because I'm trying to distinguish this from other podcasts that don't do that. And the reason that
Yeah,
other podcasts don't do that is because they don't listen well. They don't listen carefully enough. They're
sure.
just trying to get through okay, I only got 34 minutes before break. Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden the podcasts all sound the same. And
Yep.
it's like, well, okay. So
And
people
I
that
think,
listen well, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I think something you do and that I consider to be part of good listening is the art of the follow-up question or just the paraphrasing. So what you're saying is this, of course you sprinkle that in with humor. So what you're saying is that Democrats are dumb. But it's like if I'm letting my wife or my brother-in-law or my best friend talk for a long time, I might not be silent because that can get awkward, but I'm using they might pass the tennis ball back to me. I'm using my turn to say, yeah, keep going. What else about that? Like, why is that? What do you feel about that? Where's this going to go? And so essentially you're giving them the floor. And if they try to give you the floor back, you say, no, no, it's still your turn. Still your turn. And that takes a kind of intentionality that I agree is emaciated.
What I love about your style, Keith, is that uh, there's a container there that's not anxious. It's a non-anxious presence. I mean, I can tell you struggle with anxiety, but the beautiful thing about your struggle is it just feels like you're still a container that isn't interested in pushing your anxiety onto somebody else. And some people, that's how they listen. That their modality is if they hear something stressful that someone said, they can't contain it with a non-anxious, curious presence with an attention span. They have to kind of just immediately return some other anxiety of their own. Like, oh yeah, well, I'm dealing with the same thing.
Hmm.
And it's like, well, okay. It can sometimes feel like or I dealt with that when I was a kid, yeah, and then there's other more horrible things that have happened.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, well, I mean, I might be interested in hearing about that at some point, but that very moment probably was not the best way to have that make me feel like I was listened to. Because it just
Hmm.
feels like sometimes it feels like you're diminishing what I've said, or, you know, so that's anyway. I appreciate your
Okay.
non-anxious presence.
Well,
And
thank you.
yeah,
That's
it's not like you're just some guy that's levitating on a cloud and you have no facial expression and you're like, yes, if you want to get involved in real estate, um, rid the richest man in Babylon, you know, you can, I can tell you have normal human reactions, but you're not like, "Ah," so good for
Hmm.
you, man. And you're a
Thank you.
unique guy. I really highly respect you. You're just it's amazing what you've done with just nothing. I
Hmm.
mean, with your mind and with your faithfulness, and you're an amazing story, I think.
Thank
So
you very much. That's very kind. And I would love to, in this public venue or in a private venue, keep you posted on the real estate goals because, it seems to be
sure.
going well. And I every day is, I try to re-surrender it. But, maybe in 4 years, if your podcast is in the top 10 and I can come on and say, remember in 2022, when I said, 2026 was the goal. I'd love to see if I get there because it's a lot of fun and it's very fun to hear from other people as I share my story. People start sharing their goals. And these are adults, right? So, but it sort of feels like teaching, where it's like, you have a goal to get into this college, and I'm invested now in your goal. You have a goal to get an A on this paper. And so it's been a fun part of my journey that people are now sharing their financial goals, and I get to encourage or just stay on the sidelines and cheer, or maybe even be involved. But I appreciate you listening well to my excitement there.
And what I hear you saying is that you really appreciated me listening well.
That's right.
That's what I heard. So
you got it. It landed.
And I also heard that I had a good sense of humor, which I'm going to take that and put that in my front pocket today, and that's going to carry me through.
I didn't hear your esteemed co-host laughing at your jokes today like I did last time, and I think that's maybe insufficient sense of humor on his part, or maybe he's not here. So
yeah, we'll have to get him back on for next time. Well, Keith, thank you again for coming on and giving us an update, and we're excited to have you back.
It's an honor, and always, keep me in mind if you need a guest who's not quite as cool as some of these, like the cop who worked on the oil rig. That was a great episode.
Yeah.
But I will gladly take my humble seat at the table here with you. Thanks for having me on.
You're very kind.